Welcome back to the Balancing Act podcast. I'm Andy Temte, and on the Balancing Act, we talk to business leaders and industry experts to explore the balancing acts we play in our professional lives and learn about the events that put rocket boosters behind their career success. Today, I've got a really special treat for you because we have our son, Brandon Temte, joining us. Brandon is the Chief Pulmonary and Critical Care Fellow at the University of Wisconsin, where he'll be staying on as faculty next year. Yay! He also performs data science and machine learning research, helping those hospitalized with respiratory failure, and has won a number of medical education awards for his teaching efforts. Today, we're going to talk about how to be a good healthcare consumer in a world that is filled with health-related myths and disinformation. And I'd like to welcome you formally to the show again.
Yeah, it's good to be back. It's been a couple of years.
I know, and you are my first, other than Dan Strafford, who helped me launch the show at the beginning, you are the first repeat customer of this show.
All right.
Yeah. And then next week, we'll have Andy Rosen from Kaplan on the show, and he'll be my second repeat to celebrate 200 episodes. But the real celebration is that the whole family is here in La Crosse. Brandon is sitting right next to me. His brother Nick is here, girlfriends, spouses, and most importantly, Brandon's new baby, Riley. So I'm a grandpa. He's a new father.
I got my dad's socks on.
You got your dad's socks on, and I have my cool-ass grandpa socks on. So that's as close as we get to swearing on this show. So, Brandon, this is your second appearance. You're back in episode 43. We were talking. What have you been doing in the last few years?
So last time we talked, I was the chief medical resident out in Portland. And so I transitioned back to Wisconsin to be closer to family. So I've been at the University of Wisconsin for the last 3 years, just finishing up fellowship. We just had our graduation and getting everything all set up to start as faculty in the fall, like you said. During this time, I've been working on a lot of medical education research, and then I've also been delving into data science research, which is not something that I initially thought I would be spending a lot of time in, but I've been working with Dr. Matt Sherpeck at the University of Wisconsin, which has been super cool. He's been an awesome mentor.
Yeah.
And then, I'm just trying to stay well-rounded outside the hospital now that I got a little more time.
So what do you get to do this summer?
This summer, I get to sit with new baby and just fish and play golf and hang out outside and look at trees, which is her current hobby.
That is just awesome. Now, Brandon, the whole episode is dedicated to being a good healthcare consumer. We're creating a public good here. We're trying to support consumer healthcare decisions. What are the disclaimers that we've got to lay out before we get started in earnest?
Yeah, there's a couple of things that we kind of just have to say really at the beginning of any of these shows. So this information is not to replace the expertise of your treating physician, your healthcare teams. You should always consult with your doctors, your primary doctor regarding any major health decisions. And if you have questions about anything you see on the news, online, in this podcast, an article, you should really be chatting with them. And then also, furthermore, the topics that we're going to be discussing are very complex. This is by no means a comprehensive discussion. Evidence-based medicine, which is what we're going to be focusing on the most, is a whole course in medical school and something that takes years and years of practice. So this is not all-encompassing of that. And then, some of these topics are sensitive for people. There's a lot of people out there with strong beliefs. So I do want to be cognizant of that. And then, I just want to outright say I understand why people are frustrated with the American healthcare system. And I understand why people are trying to find their own answers and they're Googling things. The direct and indirect effects of healthcare insurance companies in this country have just made it impossible to provide adequate and timely healthcare, and the demands of patient care has widely outstripped the available providers to see all of these patients. And to add to that, we've had this great resignation of physicians due to burnout, which has just made these disparities even worse. So I absolutely understand why people are trying to find their own answers, maybe don't have quick access to their doctor. This is not really designed to solve that problem, but it's really just to name the elephant in the room.
Yeah. And just to be super, super clear, you are not representing the University of Wisconsin here.
Yeah. So
Right.
anything that I say is not, again, a representation exactly of my employer or anything like that.
Yeah.
So I'm here on my own
Yeah.
independence.
This is dad and son
Yep.
trying to do a good thing for the world.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
So I am going to say the hard part out loud at the outset of the show. We're living in a very dangerous post-truth, expertise skeptic world where a large swath of the population would rather listen to loud, undereducated influencers that trade in half-truths and conspiracy theories than experts like this man right over here who have dedicated their lives to their craft. I'm not talking down at anyone here, but let's just be very clear about the trends that we're seeing. And this trend, it applies to many different subject areas, but particularly medicine. So, Brandon, set the table for us. Why is it so important for us to be having this conversation about making better healthcare decisions in mid 2025?
Yeah, so I think this is as I've been going through training. I've been in training for about 10 years now, and as I've been going through this process, it's become more and more pertinent as social media becomes popular. The 24-hour news cycle, things are getting thrown
Yeah.
at people left, right, and center. There's a high volume of conflicting health information on the internet and in the news, and people are really left confused of what to believe and how to make the best healthcare decisions for themselves, even if it's simple things.
Yeah.
And I think it's fair to say that the current administration that we are with right now has been very vocal and open about people making their own medical decisions and having more of these decisions in the hands of patients alone. And through a multitude of factors, not just that, the trust in medical experts has really been systematically eroded over time. And I know my generation of physicians that's going through training and getting older is we're really feeling the effects of that. And you're getting all of this information from all of these tertiary sources, but health news anchors, politicians, influencers, bloggers, the vast majority of them that you're getting this information from don't have the skills or the training to interpret a lot of these medical studies, which just leads to more and more conflicting messages, even if we're talking about the same thing.
Yeah.
Now, again, just like before, I do want to say I don't think people are intentionally spreading misinformation or what they think is misinformation in most cases. I think people are trying to do the best with what they have, but the internet and all of the people that have access to it have provided a lot of different opinions, and these opinions make things really muddy. And a lot of people are providing it without much expertise or even data sometimes. And even if they are using data, you see a lot of people cherry picking science. There's millions of publications on PubMed, which is our central database, and it's really easy to go out and grab an article and say, oh, science says blank, out of those millions of articles. And so that cherry picking leads to a lot of people using stuff that maybe isn't the best evidence.
Yeah.
And then also, this cherry picking, we've got a lot of pre-existing biases that we look at when we're looking for these studies, trying to answer the questions the way that we want them answered. And we can talk a little bit more about the biases that lead to that later. But it kind of leads me to this final point of not every medical research study used to form all of these opinions, stuff you see on the news, social media, wherever, are created equal. And even if they're using the good ones, some of them are being used out of context. And you see a lot of general statements of scientists say, experts say, studies say, but the information they might be pointing to is really old, a poorly done study, not an informative study for their question, or even invalidated studies. I've had a couple people send me some things of studies that have been redacted from the literature completely. And there's a major difference between what's evidence-based medicine and stuff that you should be using to
Yeah.
inform your healthcare decisions and what's just noise out there. I get a lot of stuff sent to me saying, just is this true? And it's always a news article. It's a lot of social media stuff. It's a lot of influencers and trying to promote this and that and the other. So I just think this is a few of the reasons that this topic has become more and more important as people have all of this information coming at them. And I just really want to help people be able to interpret some of the stuff that they're seeing to the best of their ability to try to make, the best decisions possible if they are going to do their own research.
Yeah, so you're in your early 30s. I'm in my early 60s, and I can attest to when you're in your early 60s and you go out to dinner with other couples or you're at a party, most of the conversation centers around the aches and pains that we all have. And so we talk for hours about those aches and pains. And, oh, I saw this on Facebook and I saw this on Twitter or X or whatever. And so this must be true.
Yeah.
No, it's not.
Being a doctor in the current age has gone from, can you look at this rash to, can you look at this post?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you look at this rash?
Yeah.
Nice. So, Brandon, this next question is, I think, going to be a beautiful coincidence because in episode 43, when you were on the show, we were talking about, in a mini-series about nobody wants to think anymore. So we were talking about the importance of critical thinking. What is the most important skill that the average healthcare consumer has to nurture? And I'm giving you a softball here. Is it critical thinking?
Yeah. So critical thinking, I mean, it's a pretty broad topic. And I think in this situation, you have to apply that by just asking the question why over and over again.
Yeah.
Because if you keep asking the question why when you're looking at a lot of these studies, and again, we'll talk about this in more detail, you'll eventually get to a point where you'll either realize that the rationale for you using this study or it being done or applying it to this context maybe doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But I think the biggest thing that's going to be the hardest for people to do is leaving your own biases at the door.
Yeah.
Because evidence-based medicine does not care about your opinions. Science does not really care about your opinions, but we all come in with them. I mean, even people who are seasoned physicians are coming in with biases, and the ability to truly leave your bias at the door and come away with what is the best evidence is by far and away the hardest part.
Well, a lot of us don't even haven't even processed that we have bias, that we're walking around, each one of us. You have a pair of glasses on that have a certain color and look at the world in a certain way. I have a very different set of quote unquote glasses that I look at the world in, and everybody's got this different set of glasses. It's hard to take those glasses off. This is a really, really difficult issue to get past. So we're going to let's get right to the heart of the matter. I'm watching the evening news. And when I watch the evening news, there's at least 3 or 4 very colorful song and dance commercials about some new drug or some new healthcare product out there. And you all know exactly what I'm talking about. And toward the end of all these commercials is the phrase that you used at the top of the show, consult your doctor, blah, blah, blah. Well, the vast majority of us, which is the problem, we don't really have access to a physician. What we do have access is to the internet. So the generic term Googling, why is Googling healthcare information so incredibly problematic?
Yeah, so, it's a great resource. And, overall, I think it probably provides a net good to people answering simple questions of yes, no, I'm looking for a very discrete fact. But if you've got a complex thing that you're trying to solve, asthma commercials are all over the place right now. Biologics have made an enormous difference in people's lives. They're wonderful medications, but they've got a lot of commercials, and they spew a lot of stuff. And trying to solve your severe asthma is a very complicated question. So Googling it can be really difficult to get the whole picture without talking to your doctor and having a visit and sitting down and saying what's best as a decision that you make between yourself and them. Now, we do have a little bit of data of how accurate what Googling your own healthcare is. And depending on the type of study you look at or, how they're measuring this, Googling your own healthcare is correct about 60% of the time, probably
Oh,
between 50 and 70%.
that's a really low number.
Yeah, so something that's important is my health. I mean, I don't really want to leave what would be a failing grade up to chance like that. And
Right.
so, again, it's very good for discrete questions, and by discrete questions, I mean things that have hard facts: yes, no. What is the number of tuberculosis cases in the country? Like something that you're looking up, having a conversation at dinner, like great, but
Yeah.
something that's more complex, it just doesn't give you the whole picture.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, our listeners are not going to, our traditional listeners are not going to be, they're going to recognize right away that what we're talking about is critical thinking, asking why. And I've asked everybody to go on a continuous improvement journey, and that's what continuous improvement is all about. So just apply those same tools to your healthcare decisions, and things will get a lot better. But before we cut to a quick break, what is evidence-based medicine? The three-letter acronym EBM. Why does it matter so much to the average healthcare consumer?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the main benefit to us, at least, is it helps us make more objective decisions that we know will be reproducible and correct for the person in front of us. And so, evidence-based medicine, just as at its core, is the use of scientific data to help us make informed healthcare decisions. And we use it a lot, but frankly, I think a lot of people can use it when they are going through this process of trying to sort out in the community what is going to be something that they should pursue and not. So what we do is we start with a clinical question, and the clinical question has to be something that is well thought out, and then we find the best evidence to try to answer this question. And then we appraise that evidence and say, hey, is this even answering the question that I want? Is this totally off base? Should this even inform my question? And then we apply it, and then we evaluate, did this actually do the thing that we expected to do for the patient in front of me, or is
Right.
it just part of a study that was well formulated and highly controlled?
Yep.
The benefits of it is it gives us confidence in a lot of our decisions, and it allows us to say, we've got reproducible results to say we're doing the right thing here. But not all questions have answers. Not every study is ethical to do or possible to do. And the studies that are, sometimes, we get conflicting results, which can be hard to discern. Now, the evidence-based medicine is kind of split up into kind of tiers of evidence as we look at them. There's a couple of different papers. If you're looking through things online, there's kind of the tip of the pyramid, which is meta-analyses, which take all of these different studies and they combine them together to try to answer a question, with 17, 20 different studies. There's the randomized control trials, which would be considered kind of right below them, which is you have an intervention and you put people in equal groups and trying to match them appropriately and randomizing them so that the patients can't know what's going on, the doctors can't know what's going on, so you can get true results. And then you start to go down into the ones that I tend to see on social media a lot, which is these cohort studies, these retrospective studies, or what we call case control studies, which is, a few patients, couple to 100 patients, that, are more hypothesis generating than actually doing the good quality research from these bigger studies that we actually need to inform our decisions.
Right.
And the papers that you'll see online, they'll be mostly split up into journal articles and papers, or guidelines. People tend to reference both of them. Papers, for the most part, if they come from a good reputable journal, and we can kind of talk about what that is later as you go through your process of how to evaluate this stuff, they have to go through something called a peer review process. And the peer review process, I'm going through it right now with a couple of my own papers, is you got to submit it. And then they look for experts in that field, and they go through and they evaluate. They pick those papers apart. And from my end, as when you're on the reviewer side, you're doing a great service, and when you're on the submission side, you're just like, man, they just nitpicked the bejesus out of this thing. But the point of it is they've got multiple experts looking through your paper to say, hey, does this hold up to the highest level of scientific rigor, or is this something that maybe needs a little bit more work, or is this something that should inform our healthcare? And it goes through multiple rounds and multiple iterations of that before it actually goes out to publication.
Yeah.
And the higher level the journal, the harder that process is, and the higher the level of evidence needed to make it into the journal. And then there's guidelines, and guidelines are more a culmination of all of the evidence that we have so far, with a panel of experts that are all at the top of their field, dedicated their whole life to this, and have had amazing accomplishments, sitting down and saying, with all of the information that we have in front of us, what should we be recommending to physicians, the general public? What is the best way to treat severe asthma with these biomarkers? What is the best way to manage these COPD patients? I do that just because my field is pulmonary. But these guidelines are really what should be considered the highest level of evidence in my mind.
Well, thank you for that, Brandon. So, Brandon, let's suppose that I see a new supplement that I'm interested in taking. They're everywhere. I haven't been able to see a doctor to get their opinion, but I am getting all sorts of sideline quarterback advice from friends and family. So I break down and I start doing my own quote unquote research. I just pulled up an article or what I think is a research paper. It seems to provide useful information. What do I need to be aware of of what I should be looking for as I start reading the document?
Yeah, I think the crux of this is this an informative paper? Is this not an informative paper? And there's kind of multiple steps to this. When I was taught evidence-based medicine, I practice evidence-based medicine. I kind of goes through a stepwise approach to make sure I don't miss a step. Because if I do, I could introduce one of my own biases. I could miss an important part of the study that maybe makes this an informative study or not informative. I don't want to use titles like good and bad with research, because that's not necessarily a point. I think when people say bad study, it's probably because it was taken out of context. But the first thing that you have to look at is, what is the source of that I'm getting this information from? Is this online? Is it the news? Is it social media? Is it a blog, etc.?
Yeah.
And then the very next question you have to look at, you can read that article all you want. That's great. If it agrees with your opinions, wonderful. But you should go down to the bottom of it, and you should see, do they have links to the research that they are quoting? Do they have publications that you can print on, and are they using references throughout that article, whether it's the news, blog, social media, doesn't matter. And I think it's safe to say, in my opinion, if you do not see links to their cited research that they are using to justify their claims, I think you can disregard it.
Yeah.
I think that is safe practice, and find something that does, use actual evidence to back up their claims.
Yeah.
Now, say you go to the bottom of it, you do find a hyperlink. It's to a journal article in PubMed, JAMA, New England Journal, it doesn't matter, Nature, whatever it is.
And oh, by the way, that's the word salad of the kinds of respectable journals that Brandon uses all the time.
So now say you've got this article, you pull it up, and it's going to look like a lot of gibberish at first. And that's okay. You're probably going to see the abstract first. The abstract is about 400 words at the beginning of it that gives the gist of the introduction of, like, why was this study done? How did they do the study? What were the basic results of the study? And then they're going to put a conclusion. Everybody just wants to read the conclusion and say, I read the research article. Great.
Yeah.
And we all fall into that picture. I mean, who's got time?
TLDR.
Right? Yeah.
Too long, didn't read.
Right, exactly. Who's got time? But if you're really wanting to, do this correctly, what you'll look at is kind of a stepwise approach. And the way this goes is, so what is the source of the research? Where is this paper coming from? Is this a reputable journal? Is this the Martian Journal of Pharmacologic Expertise, like something you'd never heard of?
Right.
And the next thing, once you determine, is this a good reputable journal that is publishing a lot of good stuff? And there's a lot of them. Does this study ask the right questions? So again, the basics of evidence-based medicine is making sure that you're asking the right question, and you need to make sure that your article is asking the right question. There's so much stuff I've seen taken out of context where they're asking a totally different question.
Right.
And people are using this to justify something else in the entire different direction just because it's part of a subgroup or something. So is this asking the right question? You can see that in the introduction. And then are these patients in this study like me? Are they studying if I'm 34 years old and the entire study was done on people over the age of 70, that maybe doesn't apply to me. And if you flip-flop that, that maybe
Right.
doesn't apply to me. If there
Right.
are people in totally different parts of the world from me, maybe that applies to me. But maybe there's something going on in their environment that's not going on in mine. And so maybe that's not reproducible. Your best pie in the sky is people from all over the world in these studies, which, we can never get done because that's really hard to do. But people from all different backgrounds getting lumped into these studies that can apply to a large variety of different people. So that's the next thing you have to ask is, are the people they're looking at even like me? Is this retrospective or is this prospective? And what that means is, are they looking in the past, or did they have an idea, study it, and look into the future with it and follow these people over a frame of time? Those prospective studies are the gold standard.
What makes a less informative paper?
I think the things that I see people quote as like bad papers or they use out of context is more a lot of these articles that are out there in the millions of articles on PubMed is they're hypothesis generating. But people don't understand that those were supposed to just be hypothesis generation and not actually something that should change your management. They're supposed to pose a question, try to answer the question, and send a signal to everybody to say, we should look at this more. But people will take these totally out of context and just do a quick Google search and they'll pop up just like any other article.
Right.
And all of a sudden, you're using a 30-patient study that the researcher actually intended to be a hypothesis generating article, and you're using it as actual evidence. So a less informative paper is some of these smaller ones that you can look at the patient's sample size on the study. It's very easy to see, again, right in the results and methods, to see how many patients they actually have, and that can help point you in a one direction or another very quickly.
Yeah. And going back to, you were talking about prospective versus retrospective papers, the importance of prospective studies, of saying we're going to study this, and then we go on a 10 or a 15-year journey with thousands of patients. I just want to put a little plug in for the importance of our national healthcare system, the U.S. government supporting those kinds of studies, and the problems that we're going to face as funding gets cut for those things. We don't just live in this post-expertise, post-truth world. We're now living in this world where a lot of really valuable studies are now trash. They're in the trash can because funding got cut, and you're 5 years into a 15-year study, and you basically got to go back to square one.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that is going to end up being probably a whole other discussion because it's horribly complicated and it's really been kind of hard to watch. But yeah, you can't just press a pause button on research.
Yeah, that's my point.
You can't just put a pause button on research because say you're looking at lung cancer infections or something. You've got these cell plates that have been growing for years, which people in some of our labs at the university do, and if those got cut, you lose those years of research. You can't restart them. You can't just say, oh, our bad. We didn't actually mean to cut that when we did these large sweeping cuts. You can restart your project. That's not how that works.
No, we turned off the refrigerator and all the samples are dead now.
And it's going to take years to get back there. So I think, that would be the one thing I'd say about that is it is not an on-off switch. It's a very, very complicated thing.
Yeah. Now, let's shift gears to the endless rabbit hole that people find themselves in as they get into their medical research. We've talked about what makes an informative paper, but what role does my subconscious play? We've talked about this already, our biases, but I really want to double click on the whole bias conversation because that's where it really gets confusing. Not only my subconscious bias that I'm not aware of, but then my emotions. I'm having this problem. and I want answers right now. So my biases, my emotions, they all get in the way. What else do I need to be on the lookout for?
Yeah, so I think a lot of biases lead to a few main pitfalls. The first one is kind of the classic correlation versus causation example. When we're looking at evidence-based medicine, we want causation. We want to know that X caused Y,
Right.
and an example of correlation would be something where the amount of ice cream, and these are things that you can find readily. The amount of ice cream consumed during the summer increases the amount of ER visits. Probably not, but those curves are actually perfectly with each other.
Yep.
Now, the thing that's probably there is it's a nice day outside and people went outside and they got traumatic injuries doing similar things that you'd also go get your ice cream for.
Right.
Actually, there's the same thing of like the number of shark attacks also increase with the amount of ice cream consumed. So
Right.
you could just imagine, like, you would never say that that's causation, but it's pretty strict correlation.
See, we just snuck in a really quick statistics lesson. We've described the difference between correlation and causation.
So that's one thing that I see
Huh?
people struggling with. Yes, you're right. Statistics is everywhere. And the other thing that you sometimes ignore if you're using your biases is confounding, because there's a lot of things that can go into it. So if you're using one of these studies that's maybe retrospective, there's a lot of things that could confound those results. Now,
What does the word confound mean?
so confounding is basically there's another factor that contributed to the outcome in your research that you didn't account for.
Yeah.
So if you're looking at smoking and lung cancer development, but one of the cohorts was living next to a plant that is putting out toxic stuff, and you're living there for 30 years, and you didn't account for that in your research. You're going to see that, oh, this cohort from this part right here had horrible outcomes. They must be smoking like a chimney.
Yeah.
No, there's just another thing that's causing an alternative explanation.
Thank you for that. So, how would we apply all this information that we've now gained into a real life situation or something that we might see on the news?
Yeah, so let's go back to your supplement thing, because that comes up a lot. So let's say a supplement study comes out, you see it on the news, and they say X supplement reduces your risk of heart disease. And you go, great. What does that mean? So you, having listened to this, you go online, you find the study that they're quoting. They do a good job. They quote the study. So it's something that you already know. All right. Checkbox number one. They quoted the research. Let's go to the research. You pull up the study, and it's looking at 10,000 patients, and they're looking at preventing one heart attack in a 5-year period. It's right there in the abstract. Again, you go down the stepwise approach. You know how to do that now. And everything in this study fits your definition of an informative study. It's actually in the region of the country that you currently exist. It's thousands of patients. It's studying the question you want. You want to reduce your cardiovascular risk, right?
Yeah.
So great. So you look at the study for yourself, and you see that 3.8% of patients in the control group, 190 of them, had heart attacks over that 5-year period, and 3% in the intervention group had heart attacks, or 150 patients. And the conclusion at the bottom of the article is this supplement reduces the risk of heart attacks. But how many people, and this is the part that really takes some critical thinking and a little bit of light statistics on your end. I'll say if I can do it, anyone can do it.
Yep.
How many people would actually have to take this drug? Let's price it at $60 a month. That's a pretty reasonable price for some of these supplements. How many people would have to take this drug at $60 a month in order to prevent one heart attack? And what you can do is you can calculate the number needed to treat, and you can do this on any of these articles that you're looking at. It's not perfect, but it's a really good marker of how much bang for your buck you're going to get with some of this stuff. And so if we look at this, the number needed to treat is 1 divided by the control event rate and the experimental group event rate. And so here it would be 1 divided by 0.038 minus 0.030, right?
Yep.
And what we get is and this is an easy thing to Google, number needed to treat. You would have to have 125 people take that medication for that 5-year period to prevent one heart attack. And now you as a healthcare consumer get to say, is that something that's worth it for me?
Right.
Or is this maybe something, I don't think I'm going to be one of those 125 people, 1 in 125 people that's going to get this benefit. Or maybe I am, and I've got some financial wiggle room to do that, and reducing my cardiovascular risk is very important to me. Now, obviously, you need to look at the harms with it, but if there's not risk to it, then that's ultimately your decision. Is this worth the money for me?
So is this supplement going to be a security blanket for me, really?
Yeah.
Or is it going to, have make a meaningful difference?
Because some people would look at that, and $60 for a 1 in 125 odds that I prevent one heart attack. Some people would look at that and say, I should just go buy a lottery ticket. But some people will look at that and say, oh, I have family history, and this is really important to me.
Right.
And that's where some of your beliefs and biases can come in and really inform the decision.
Right.
And now if you look at that and apply critical thinking again and say, all right, well, I'm going to change the outcome. Again, what if the outcome in that study is mortality, and it 1 in 125 prevented death in a 5-year period? That's a bigger deal. Maybe that's more worth the $60. Now, what if you look at it again, and the primary outcome of that study saying it reduced your cardiovascular risk is just your LDL number went down by 20, which is not a huge drop for a lot of people. Now is it worth $60?
Right.
And you can look at this stuff in these studies very easily by just going through the stepwise approach of saying, what is the outcome that they were looking at? Who are these patients? What were the results of it?
Yeah. So let's send our listeners away with some tools that they can use to make better personal healthcare decisions. Is there a quick checklist that you can walk us through?
Yeah, I think if you're going to do your own research, understand how to do it correctly. Know there's a lot of things that you don't know, and you don't know what you don't know. Know that your biases are going to play a risk here. And then if you are going to do your own research, please make the extra click. Don't just read the article and say, well, that's that. This person said X, Y, or Z. I'm going to believe it.
Yeah.
Do yourself a favor and click on the articles. You'd be surprised how many times things are being pulled out of context, maybe aren't being used correctly. If someone doesn't show their work and it has no links, I don't care if it's social media, anywhere, I would disregard it. And I'll say too, if you have questions about these articles, and you do have access to physicians, it's really very reasonable to send them a message asking them to discuss it further. I do get a fair amount of messages from people, and I'm glad that they do reach out and say, hey, I saw this. Does this make any sense? Should I be doing this? Especially when I was in primary care medicine through residency.
Yeah.
That's always an option to you.
Okay.
And then I think knowing too that we didn't talk about this too much, but knowing medical science is cumulative of all of the available evidence. And so when you are doing this research and you're looking at one study, or someone is quoting one study out of millions, that study may not tell the whole picture. And this is the point where I think it's important to talk with your doctor about it, because they have a little bit more information on what is the big picture. They've been informed by not only their own research and searching, but the education that they've gotten through the cumulative of what we would consider medical evidence. If you look at something from 10 years ago, you might be functioning with very old data that is not the best evidence. And also, I want to say, just because something's new does not mean it replaces the old necessarily.
It stacks on top. Oh, research stacks on top of research, stacks on top of research over decades.
Yeah.
Really.
So just know that too. If you're pulling one article out, it might not be the whole picture.
Yeah.
And I think, just as a general rule, just like you can probably discard anything that doesn't have a link to the research, I think anything that you're seeing on social media, for the most part, is mostly inaccurate, built to get clicks, and is going to mislead you and cause a lot of misinformation.
Yeah.
I understand that that's what people have access to, and you, again, get fired left, right, and center with all of these bloggers and influencers. Most of them are not trained or appropriately trained to be answering these questions. They don't have any background in evidence-based medicine, and there's a lot of conflicting information out there that will just leave you more confused than not. And same thing with the social media stuff. If something sounds too good to be true in healthcare, it almost always is. A lot of these things, supplements, alternative remedies, essential oils, just know they're not studied. a lot of these things, the biggest side effect is going to be to your wallet.
Yeah.
But there are a couple of things that if you take and they're not studied and you're taking them incorrectly because somebody on a blog post said to do so, you can cause some serious harm. I mean, we get people hospitalized with all sorts of things, and especially in the intensive care unit where I work, sometimes we get people really sick doing things that maybe are not something that I would personally advise you do.
Right. Right.
And then, I do also want people to understand, we talked a little bit about, this kind of systematic eroding of experts over time. Just understand when you go to the doctor, when you look at these research studies, these experts, researchers, doctors, they've gone through years of intensive training trying to answer these questions. And it can be really dangerous to disregard the advice of someone who's gone through years and years and years of training after completing a quick or even a comprehensive Google search. I think that's really risky. If you have questions about what you see online, like please bring them up to your doctor. But what I would emphasize to people is, when you're doing your own research, we talked earlier about guidelines being the biggest source
Yep.
of the best information. So another piece of advice I could give people as they go through this process is really look at those guidelines and those recommendations, because those guidelines are the best of the best that we have in medicine to try to answer these questions. These are the experts of the experts that have devoted their whole life to this. And if you find yourself falling away from the recommendations of a lot of these major medical guidelines, you're probably straying pretty far from the best available evidence. And if they've got weak evidence or no evidence to make their claim that's based on expert opinion because it's something we can't study or we shouldn't study, they will say that. And they will say this is based on our expert opinion. But
Yep.
if you're away from the guidelines, I would be really careful with that.
Yeah. Well, Brandon, any last thoughts you want to give us?
Yeah, so I think the last thing I'll say is, facts may not exist for everything. But when they do exist, I think one of the most dangerous things that you can do is ignore them to fulfill your own biases, right? And
Yeah.
just looking at things in favor of what you want to hear and answering questions the way that you want them answers. I think the easiest way for people to divide and control us is when facts don't matter and we're stuck arguing between ourselves. That can lead for a really dangerous situation where we all kind of get taken advantage of.
Yes. Yeah. The politicizing of healthcare research. I just can't stress how dangerous that is. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
So, Brandon, we're going to do this really, really quickly. We've given people lots of information, but I'd just love to have a little fun, and I want people to learn a little bit more about you. So, these are my lightning round questions. I ask all my guests. You are no exception here. You just won $100 million lotto jackpot, but there's a stipulation that 50% of the net winnings go to a philanthropic cause. Or an individual charity. Who's the charity?
I think for me, it'd probably be Planned Parenthood and probably the American Cancer Society, for being honest. But we obviously have a young daughter now, and it's been really hard to see the outright assault on women's health care.
Mm,
And I worry about her growing
yeah.
up in an environment where this continues to perpetuate, and the freedoms of women to make these decisions gets diminished.
Oh, well, great job, Dad. Thanks. And now I put you in a little bitty time machine. You can send. I'm really super interested in this question. You can send a message to an earlier version of Brandon Temte. What's the message and what version of yourself do you send it to?
I think be curious. You don't know everything, and everyone has something to offer. And I think the best thing that you can do with other people is search for what they're best at and how they approach problems and how they best approach problems, and use that to get the best out of them.
Yeah.
I think I didn't do a good enough job at that in my early career. If people were, looking at things differently than me, I had a predisposition to say they were looking at it wrong.
Yeah.
And they weren't. They were looking at it differently. And over time, I've tried to take the approach of asking them a little bit more why, and seeing that just because they're coming at it from a different way doesn't mean that they're wrong. And I can actually harness this different opinion to have a better outcome for the whole team.
Yeah. Awesome. Now, what are you working on right now, other than your golf game, in your personal journey of growth?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm gonna have a very stereotypical summer for a doctor, just golf all summer. But
Nice.
I think I think just being positive, a positive leader that promotes other people and encourages other people. I mean, we're in a really hard field where I think people need a lot of encouragement and a lot of support from those around them, and especially people in higher positions as they go into the faculty roles and things like that. Um, it doesn't really matter, though, what you do. I think everyone everywhere needs somebody to lift them up and propel them forward,
Yeah.
instead of knocking them back.
I'm very proud of you for that, son. Thank you so much. So everyone, this is Dr. Brandon Temte. So glad that he was on the show today. We're going to cut this episode up into some smaller bite-sized chunks and have those out there as resources for you as you continue your journey as a listener to make better healthcare decisions. So thank you for being here today.
Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent. Excellent. So my name is Andy Temte. This is the Balancing Act podcast. You can find us on all the major streaming services as well as out on YouTube. Please like, subscribe, rate, and most importantly, share this public good with your friends, your neighbors, and your colleagues, and probably a family member or two as well. Show is produced by Nicholas Temte, and we'll see you next time on The Balancing Act.